February 1st, 1942. Somewhere in the Central Pacific Ocean, the USS Enterprise was running for her life. Just 8 weeks after Pearl Harbor had reduced America's Pacific Fleet to twisted metal and burning oil, the Big E had struck back. She had launched the first offensive carrier raid of the war against Japanese bases in the Marshall Islands. Now, as she retreated at flank speed, danger was closing fast. 5 twin-engine Mitsubishi G-3M bombers screamed toward her from 10,000 feet above, their engines slicing through the cold ocean air. Every anti-aircraft gun on the ship opened fire, tracers stitching the sky like threads of fire. 4 of the bombers dropped their payloads and peeled away, all misses. But the 5th bomber, it didn't turn. Lieutenant Kazuo Nikai's plane was already dying. F-4F Wildcats had torn into it during its approach, smoke pouring from the fuselage. Nikai knew he wouldn't make it back to base. So he made a decision that wouldn't become common for another 2 years. He aimed his burning aircraft directly at the Enterprise's flight deck. On the catwalk below, 25-year-old aviation machinist Bruno Gaido saw the bomber grow larger with each passing second. Flames licked the engine cowling, tracers stitched the air, and every gun on the ship was firing, but the plane kept coming. 10 seconds. That was all the time left before disaster. Bruno Gaido did the only thing he could think of. He ran, not away from the danger, but toward it. Across the exposed flight deck, he scrambled into the rear seat of a parked SBD Dauntless dive bomber. He grabbed the twin .30 caliber machine guns, swung them toward the approaching inferno, and opened fire. What happened next would become one of the most extraordinary acts of individual bravery in naval aviation history. But Bruno's story didn't start that day. He had wanted to join the Navy immediately, drawn by steady pay, 3 meals a day, and something more valuable to a young man from Milwaukee, purpose. His father, John Gaido, said no. Bruno was only 18, too young to understand the cost of war. For 6 long years, Bruno drifted between odd jobs on farms and in breweries, watching the news from Europe and Asia grow darker. By October 1940, even his cautious father knew war was inevitable, and he finally relented. Bruno enlisted. After boot camp, he was assigned to Naval Air Station Pearl Harbor on Ford Island, at the heart of Pacific Fleet aviation operations. He trained as an aviation machinist, learning to maintain the complex engines that kept Navy aircraft flying. In July 1941, he was temporarily assigned to Scouting Squadron 6 aboard the USS Enterprise. His role was supposed to be temporary, just enough to learn carrier aviation basics, but Bruno Gaido had a way of making himself indispensable. The Dauntless dive bomber was a 2-seat aircraft. The pilot sat in the front, controlling the plane during near-vertical attacks on enemy ships. The radioman/gunner sat in the rear, operating the radio and manning the twin .30 caliber guns that defended against enemy fighters. As a machinist, Gaido's job was keeping the planes flying, but he also qualified as a rear-seat gunner. He quickly developed a reputation for toughness, something the Navy valued above all else. One story in particular became legend aboard the Enterprise. In June 1941, Lieutenant Norman Clyice was about to make his first carrier landing. Standard procedure called for sandbags in the rear seat to simulate a gunner's weight. But when Clyice climbed into the cockpit, he found Bruno Gaido strapped in, grinning, ready to man the guns. "What the hell are you doing here?" Cly demanded. "This is my qual flight. Get out." Gaido didn't move. "You got wings, don't you?" he said. His calm confidence transformed Clyice's fear into focus. He made 6 perfect landings that day. Clyice would later sink 3 Japanese carriers at Midway and live to 100, but he never forgot the machinist who believed in him when it mattered most. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Bruno Gaido was not at Pearl Harbor. He was aboard the USS Enterprise, returning from a mission delivering Marine fighter planes to Wake Island. The Enterprise's delay meant she avoided the devastating attack on Battleship Row. When news reached the Big E, her aircraft launched immediately, searching for the Japanese fleet. They didn't find it. That delay likely changed the course of the war. By December 9th, America was at war, and the Enterprise, one of only 3 operational carriers in the Pacific, became the tip of the American spear. The weeks after Pearl Harbor were brutal. Wake, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Japanese forces advanced relentlessly. Only a handful of carriers stood between Japan and the rest of the Pacific. Admiral Chester Nimitz knew he couldn't change the war overnight, but he could strike back. On January 11, 1942, the Enterprise departed Pearl Harbor as part of Task Force 8 under Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey. Their target, the Marshall Islands, where Japanese bases threatened American shipping lanes. Commander Thomas Jeter summed up the mood: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This Sunday, it's our turn to shoot. The raid began before dawn on February 1st. 36 Dauntless dive bombers from the Enterprise struck the atolls of Kwajalein and Watch. Japanese forces were caught completely off guard. Aircraft on the ground were destroyed, ships sunk, and shore installations wrecked. It was small but sweet revenge. But as the Enterprise withdrew at high speed, disaster struck. 5 Mitsubishi G-3M bombers found her. 4 dropped their bombs and turned back, but the 5th, Lieutenant Kazuo Nikai, had other plans. Wildcat fighters had shredded his plane. Flames streamed from the engines. He aimed directly for the Enterprise. This was the birth of the Kamikaze spirit, though the word wouldn't be coined for another 2.5 years. From his position on the catwalk, Bruno Gaido watched the bomber approach. He had seconds to act. His normal battle station offered protection. Instead, he ran across the exposed flight deck into the rear seat of a parked Dauntless. Flames and tracer fire surrounded him. He opened up on the Japanese bomber. Tracers poured into the cockpit, shredding the fuselage. At the last second, Captain Murray ordered a hard turn. The combination of the maneuver and Gaido's fire caused the bomber to lose control. Its wing clipped the tail of Gaido's plane, shearing it off just feet from where he stood. The Japanese bomber plunged into the sea. Still in the rear seat, Gaido extinguished the flames from fuel spilling across the deck. Only then did he climb out, and then disappeared into the ship's compartments. He expected punishment for abandoning his station. Instead, Vice Admiral Halsey promoted him on the spot. Gaido had saved the Enterprise. He would later receive a commendation from the Secretary of the Navy. In the months that followed, Gaido continued flying missions. In late May 1942, the Battle of Midway began. Gaido climbed into the rear seat of a Dauntless piloted by Ensign Frank Flaherty. They targeted the Japanese carrier Kaga. The morning was disastrous for the Americans. Torpedo bombers were decimated, but their sacrifice drew enemy fighters down to sea level. At 20,000 feet, dive bombers struck. Gaido felt the Dauntless pitch forward into a near-vertical dive, the gravity pressing him into his seat. Bombs hit the carrier, flames exploded, and in minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers were burning uncontrollably. Returning from the strike, Gaido and Flaherty were attacked by Japanese Zero fighters. Using a defensive arc formation, the rear gunners poured fire into the attackers, downing 2. Their plane was badly damaged. Fuel leaking, they ditched in the open ocean. Rescue never came. A Japanese destroyer, Makagumo, found them first. Gaido and Flaherty became prisoners. What happened next remained secret for 3 years. Interrogated and likely tortured, they were eventually executed, bound and thrown into the Pacific. Gaido was just 26 years old. His body was never recovered. Bruno Gaido's story might have ended in darkness, but his courage left a legacy. He saved the Enterprise on February 1, 1942. He helped sink a Japanese carrier at Midway. He inspired pilots like Dusty Clyice. Posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, Gaido became the first inductee into the Enlisted Combat Aircrew Roll of Honor aboard the USS Yorktown Museum. His name is inscribed at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. Bruno Gaido showed what one person could do when they chose to act. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to face it anyway. On the flight deck of the Enterprise, with a kamikaze screaming down on him, Bruno Gaido chose action, and in that moment, he became a legend.